Santa Claus, The Historical Origins and Evolution of the Legendary Christmas Figure, by Charles River Editors, narrated by Colin Fluxman. Introduction. Dear Editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says, if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Letter written by Virginia O Hanlon in the Sun newspaper, 1897. Christmas is the most important holiday of the year. After the corresponding days that exalt the national pride of each country, such as Independence Day in the United States, Victory Day in Russia, or Bastille Day in France, it's December the 25th that articulates the life, the work, and the economy in much of the world, including many non-Christian countries. Since ancient times, the beginning of winter has been the occasion for most people to eat, drink, dance, and get together to beat the drum and take a break. Especially since the 20th century onwards, the days adjacent to the holiday have become an occasion to do big business. The winter season is the most solid stimulus for the economy, more than any fiscal package, since the incomes of families, spending, credit, and consumption in all productive sectors are significantly increased. In the United States alone, Christmas sales are estimated to generate $3 trillion. 1804 would prove to be another milestone in the history of Christmas. In that year, an antique dealer named John Pintard founded the New York Historical Society, and he promoted St. Nicholas as patron of the city. 5 years later, the writer, Washington Irving, published, under a pseudonym, a semi-fictional account of New York. Irving took ample poetic licenses to fabricate some myths about the founding of the metropolis, and in one of them, admirer Olaf von Kohland, one of the founders of New Amsterdam, has a dream where St. Nicholas reveals to him the bright future awaiting that immensity of forests and lakes. And the sage Olaf dreamed a dream, and lo, the good St. Nicholas came riding over the tops of the trees in that selfsame wagon, wherein he brings his yearly presents to children. And he descended hard where the heroes of Communipaw had made their late repast. And he lit his pipe by the fire, and sat himself down and smoked. And as he smoked, the smoke from his pipe ascended into the air, and spread like a cloud overhead. And Olaf bethought him, and he hastened and climbed up to the top of one of the tallest trees, and saw that the smoke spread over a great extent of country. And as he considered it more attentively, he fancied that the great volume of smoke assumed a variety of marvelous forms, where in dim obscurity he saw shadowed out palaces and domes and lofty spires, all of which lasted but a moment, and then faded away until the whole rolled off, and nothing but the green woods were left. And when St. Nicholas had smoked his pipe, he twisted it in his hatband, and, laying his finger beside his nose, gave the astonished von Kohland a very significant look. Then, mounting his wagon, he returned over the tree-tops and disappeared. The following year, the Society commissioned artist Alexander Anderson to make a painting for its annual dinner on December the 6th, St. Nicholas Day. Anderson's painting, a triptych, shows St. Nicholas holding a rod and standing in front of a honeycomb. Next to him is a dog, but other elements of the legend have been lost. The right side of the triptych is the most interesting. At the top are two boys, a girl with her apron full of fruit, smiling, and a boy with empty hands, wiping his tears. Underneath the children is a chimney with two stockings hanging on both sides. One is full of gifts, and the other has thistles. The scene is completed by toy soldiers and a cat at the foot of the fireplace. The name Santa Claus, which was difficult for American children to pronounce, would evolve into Santa Claus in the United States. Around that time, two other literary works appeared and helped shape Christmas. The first was a collection of stories by Washington Irving entitled Sketchbook from 1819. The work not only gave to American literature the characters of Ichabod Crane and Rip Van Winkle, but sparked widespread interest in Christmas as a cozy domestic ritual. Next came A Visit from St. Nicholas, a children's poem better known as The Night Before Christmas, which was published anonymously in 1823, but is traditionally attributed to Clement Clarke Moore, a university professor and biblical scholar. The poem spread quickly and helped install a definitive image of Santa Claus in the popular imagination, with his sleigh, his 8 reindeer, each one with a name, his red nose, and his journeys down chimneys to fill children's stockings with toys. Supposedly, Moore got his inspiration during a shopping outing in a sleigh, and he based his Santa Claus on a Dutchman who lived in Chelsea. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled! His dimples, how merry! His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. Meanwhile, the turning point for old St. Nicholas, now Santa Claus, came with the December 24, 1881 edition of Harper's Weekly. Artist Thomas Nast gave him his definitive look for the Christmas issue as an old man with a huge round belly and a belt, a thick white beard, a red nose, a cap, mistletoe on his head, a miniature horse toy in one hand, a pipe between his fingers, and a child hanging from his neck. Ever since, Santa has been known the world over for being delightfully paunchy and endlessly jolly. To most, these 2 descriptors alone are enough to conjure up his name and lead them to envision a round-bellied grandfather type, clad in a fur-trimmed, cherry-red ensemble, armed with candy canes and a bottomless sack of presents, and blessed with a bushy, silvery white beard. Santa Claus is a man with many monikers. Kris Kringle, Father Christmas, Papa Noel, among others, and is perhaps the most iconic and internationally recognized personality in recent history. Pop culture enthusiasts know to trace Santa's roots to St. Nicholas of Myra, as hinted by another alternative name, St. Nick, and it's widely accepted that Coke manufactured the contemporary image of Santa embraced by the world today. On both counts, they are only partially correct, because in reality Santa is a colorful amalgamation of different figures who appear in various countries' folk stories across a wide range of centuries. Santa Claus, the historical origins and evolution of the legendary Christmas figure, looks at how the character and his famous attributes came about, the historical inspirations behind him, and all the stories that have evolved around him. The myths behind the myth. Oh, when you see the wild hunt ride by, they'll put hell shoes upon your feet. They'll brew some ale and slaughter some meat. A naked man will light your pyre, and then the flames will leap higher. Yordsvin, the Wild Hunt Song. It might surprise some to learn that the largely Americanized Santa Claus, adored by children around the globe today, traces one of its earliest influences to pagan legends and traditions, most specifically those told by the Scandinavian Norsemen. Amongst the Norse gods, it was Woden, better known as Odin, who reigned supreme. Though mostly associated with death and healing, he also presided over the fields of war, royalty, knowledge, and poetry. First and foremost, Woden was a descendant of the old Germanic god of wind and the dearly departed, often attached with a female equivalent known as Freya. As told by Nordic lore, Woden was the father of Thor, Baldur, and Tiw, and he was described as deeply spiritual and brimming with wisdom, yet notoriously fickle. Woden was the central celebratory figure of the ancient Yule, a festive holiday that took place in the midst of winter, usually coinciding with the winter solstice, the shortest day of winter, on December the 21st. Like the modern-day Santa Claus, Woden was a seemingly all-knowing deity, both revered and feared by children across Viking territories, particularly during this season, for he showered joy upon the well-behaved and inflicted misery upon the disobedient. In contrast to the gentle and gregarious Santa, however, Woden was neither warm nor cuddly. As a matter of fact, the chiffon white beard and the hallmarks of age are the only physical attributes they share. The sage-like Woden was tall, scrawny, and wizened, somewhat reminiscent of J.R.R. Tolkien's Gandalf, with a rich braided beard and a gnarled wooden staff permanently in hand. In paintings, Woden's almost skeletal figure was hidden in a loose-fitting dark blue coat, his shadowy hood draped over an empty eye socket. Other representations have him donning a broad-brimmed hat, or a triangle of black cloth, snugly fitted under a pointed wizard's hat for the same latter purpose. When diving deeper into the significance of Woden at Yuletime, his connections to his contemporary counterpart become even more apparent. To begin with, Woden, also referred to as Yolnir, the master of Yule, delivered gifts and discipline not on a plush red sleigh bordered in gold, but on the back of his prized flying stallion, a magnificent 8-legged beast he called Sleipnir. Sleipnir was the spawn of the scandalous god Loki in mare form, and Svaldidfari, a mighty mortal horse, was the predecessor of Santa's herd of magical reindeer. Woden was also supposedly accompanied by a pair of talking ravens named Munin and Hugin, who served as loyal pets and spies. Woden, the Vikings believed, watched over each and every one of his charges throughout the year, and, come Yule, one would be presented with the results of Odin's assessments. In other words, he knows if one has been bad or good, so be good for Woden's sake. Woden's excursion over the slumbering rooftops in the land of the Norse occurred during what is now referred to as the Wild Ride or the Wild Hunt. The fearsome god mounted Sleipnir and spearheaded the spectral procession, a diverse hunting entourage composed of fellow gods, ghostly souls, and supernatural characters, including sword maiden Valkyries, fairies, sprites, and elves. Hunting duties aside, the eldritch crew swooped down and spooked adults and children still roaming the streets after hours. Obedient children, on the other hand, very much looked forward to Woden's visits. Children stuffed their boots with straw, carrot sticks, or other root vegetables for Sleipnir, and placed them carefully by the hearth, just as children today prepare plates of freshly baked cookies and a cold glass of milk for their midnight visitor. The straw-filled boots may have also inspired the Christmas stockings now hung above indoor fireplaces. Woden crawled up fire pits and shimmied down the chimneys of Nordic huts and longhouses. Others say he simply materialized. The next morning, children scrambled over to their boots. Those who passed Odin's tests squealed with glee, for the straw in their shoes had been replaced with fistfuls of sweets, apples, and little trinkets, among other prizes. Naughty children shrunk away from their boots, whimpering, for in them lay a lone scourge. Various other elements derived from the cult of Woden can also be spotted in the present-day pantheon of Christmas characters. Woden, for instance, was hailed as the Lord of Alfheim, land of the elves. Occult weapons, jewelry, and other magical paraphernalia were forged in a kind of factory miles upon miles below the earth's surface, operated by these elves. Then there were the so-called Yule goats. According to medieval lore, Thor soared through the skies in a chariot drawn by Donder and Blitzen, Thunder and Lightning, the names of 2 of the 8 reindeer that pull Santa's sleigh. Many centuries ago, Nordic villagers, channeling the Yule goats, put on ratty robes, terrifyingly detailed masks, and a slew of other frightening disguises, and, as per tradition, demanded presents and prizes from their neighbors. Only in the 19th century was the Yule goat transformed into an amiable, gift-bearing character. Today, many Scandinavians tie handcrafted straw ornaments of Yule goats onto the branches of their Christmas trees. Next, there was the Yule boar, not to be confused with the Yule goats. Crispy wild boars that have been roasted over a fire were served on platters as offerings to the Nordic deity Freyr, the god of fertility, prosperity, and sacral kingship. In exchange for the delicious swine, perhaps the first ever Christmas ham, the villagers hoped to receive manifold blessings throughout the following year, many of them banking on the conception of a child. Gifts of dried fruit cakes and candies were also presented to the gods Freya and Frigg, as well as the spirits of their ancestors. The parallels between Yule and modern Christmas do not stop there. After a sumptuous Yuletide feast, the villagers poured into forests and local cider apple orchards. Group by group, they shuffled from one tree to another, decorating apple trees and evergreens, and mumbling hallowed incantations. Humming and singing, or caroling, was believed to ensure fruitful harvests in the upcoming year. Families and neighbors also sat in circles, weaving and piecing together massive pine bough wheels, which bore a certain resemblance to the Christmas wreaths of today. These pine wheels, their round shape a representation of the cyclical nature of the seasons, were then set ablaze and sent barreling down the slopes of hills as a tribute to Sol, goddess of the sun. The revelry that ensued during Yuletide was of a more libertine and chaotic nature compared to Christmas celebrations today, which are marked by delectable feasts and wholesome quality time. For Yuletide, the Vikings dined on hunks of assorted meats and juicy hard-skinned fruits, and guzzled down goblet after goblet of Yule, or Yule, essentially a type of ale. One could say the Yule has since been replaced with eggnog, a thick dairy-based beverage consisting of brandy or rum and a blend of milk, sugar, and eggs. Striking similarities can also be detected in mythical figures outside of the cult of Woden. As already mentioned, the white-bearded and hammer-wielding Thor, also known as Thunor, is believed to be another mythological being that influenced modern depictions of Santa. Thor's enchanted goats aside, the god was often depicted in royal red garments, and in some illustrations he is seen with an unruly shock of ginger-red hair. Moreover, the red, white, and black seen in Santa's wardrobe, coincidentally, and perhaps not, reflected the colors associated with ancient Germany, as well as its Aryan caste system. In the 1980s, a few historians claim to have found evidence linking Santa to mystical Siberian shamanism. Jason Mankey of Pathos explained, "In this hypothesis, Santa flies like a shaman in a sleigh. Reindeer are representative of Siberian reindeer spirits, and his red and white robes derive from the agaric mushrooms used to facilitate shamanic trance." In reality, shamans never rode in sleighs, rarely contacted reindeer spirits, and only used mushrooms on very rare occasions. Moreover, reindeer were a 19th century addition to the Santa mythos, and Siberians didn't wear red and white clothes. Therefore, if Santa is related to shamanism, it's very indirectly. The man behind the myth. Children, I beseech you to correct your hearts and thoughts, so that you may be pleasing to God. Consider that although we may reckon ourselves to be righteous and frequently succeed in deceiving men, we can conceal nothing from God. Attributed to St. Nicholas of Myra. Eventually, Woden and other pagan cults were all but flushed out of existence by a new dominant religion, Christianity. More rulers and sovereigns began to subscribe to the monotheistic faith, and in time the sacrilegious act of worshipping Woden and other pagan gods was outlawed. In the same breath, the old traditions of Yule were retired, and the festivities were delayed so as to better align with Christian holidays. One crucial figure in Christianity would become the most renowned of all of Santa's antecedents. Born in the 3rd century CE, in the small Turkish village of Patara, Nicholas of Myra was both conceived and received upon the lap of luxury, but despite his family's wealth, tragedy soon befell him, as both his mother and his father fell gravely ill and died shortly thereafter. Naturally, Nicholas was deeply saddened by the sudden demise of those who raised him, but he was resolved to put his substantial inheritance to good use. Rather than squander his riches on elaborate yet empty houses, fancy clothes, and other superficial articles, he dedicated the entirety of his inheritance to the impoverished and others desperately in need of relief. Nicholas was a storied man, to say the least. One of the oft-repeated tales surrounding the spell-binding character has him settling the dowries for a trinity of destitute daughters, thereby saving the women from prostitution. On the first evening, the father of the women nailed a line of stockings, in other versions boots, onto the wall, just under one of the windows of their tumble-down hut, as instructed by the provider of the dowries. Just a few minutes after the scheduled time, a fat pouch of gold sailed through the window and landed in one of these stockings, which was discovered by the ecstatic father the next morning. As Nicholas had promised, 2 more pouches of gold appeared in the stockings over the following 2 evenings. This is another possible origin of the Christmas stocking tradition. Word quickly spread about the humble, yet incomparably generous and vastly influential Nicholas, later crowned the Bishop of Myra. He was remembered long after his death, venerated as the patron saint of children and the protector of orphans, sailors, and prisoners. The modesty and secrecy that marked Nicholas's charity work, some say, dwelt in the fount of inspiration behind the now widely celebrated game, Secret Santa. Furthermore, similar to the behavior-conscious Santa, Nicholas also urged to recite their daily prayers diligently, honor their parents, and practice good manners. There are no contemporary testimonies or works about St. Nicholas. A biography about another saint from the same area, written about 100 years later, mentions a visit to the tomb of Nicholas of Myra. His name also appears on a list of attendees to the Council of Nicaea, although the list was written more than a century after the event. These are the 2 oldest sources mentioning this proto-Santa Claus. In 520, about 2 centuries after his death, a church dedicated to him was built on the ruins of an older temple, where he supposedly served as bishop. This was confirmed in 2017 by a professional Turkish government excavation that found the remains of the most ancient church beneath the 6th century building. Thus, there is nothing implausible about the existence of an historic St. Nicholas, who had the custom of helping the poor and giving gifts anonymously, even if the lives written about him were strongly colored by legend. His feast was set on December the 6th, and he was named patron of children. It was said the ancient Greeks in the Lycian town of Myra mourned the death of their beloved bishop. The kindling these villagers used to preserve the roaring flames of his memory were the feats and fables of St. Nicholas's miracles, lavishing them upon passing merchants and travellers from the next town over. The riveting stories ultimately took a life of their own, so much so that new, unproven stories began to leak into the mix. Nicholas was first popularized as the patron saint of navigation, unseating the pagan divine twins of Myra. Statues of the twosome, the sons of the sky god, were dismantled and replaced with exquisite hand-carved effigies of the sacred Christian bishop. In time, the saint's image was added to most official Byzantine seals. More and more Greek cities and towns adopted Nicholas as their patron saint. Doing so was only logical, for the Byzantine Empire was encompassed by the Mediterranean. When Christianity first penetrated the Kievan Rus in the 9th century, the sea captains and sailors of this region, the first organized state on Russian territory, were also placed under Nicholas's protection. Curiously, apart from orphans, sailors, and children, pawnbrokers too selected Nicholas as their tutelary saint. 3 golden balls, which harkened back to the 3 pouches of gold the bishop gifted to the 3 sisters, could be seen dangling above the front doors of pawn shops. At this stage, those in Western Europe knew of St. Nicholas, but they were unfamiliar with the captivating details of his life. This changed when the Seljuk Turks descended upon Anatolia in 1071, still using momentum from their victory at the Battle of Manzikert against Emperor Romanus IV Diogenes and the Byzantine forces. The citizens of Myra braced themselves for the inevitable and surrendered to their captors. In 1087, a company of Christian Greeks based in the heel of Italy hatched a plan to recover Nicholas's blessed remains from the Muslim conquerors. That spring, a crew disguised as merchants was dispatched to Myra. There, as instructed, the merchants lowered themselves underground, swiped the skeleton and a number of other relics, and escaped back to Bari, Italy. The arrival of Nicholas's bones in Bari on May the 9th is now honoured as the translation of the saint. 2 winters later, following Pope Urban II's inauguration of the new cathedral in Bari, Nicholas's remains were entombed underneath the primary altar. Now that the saint's remains were in Christian hands, where they belonged, the Church unleashed missionaries who travelled to neighbouring towns, enlightening the uninformed about Nicholas's miracles. Bari soldiers who voyaged to faraway lands also brought with them the tales of Nicholas's remarkable achievements, and he was soon the most popular saint in all of Europe. In the West, Nicholas was extolled as the guardian saint of all children. On this feast day, December the 6th, Christians venerated him by presenting gifts to their loved ones and neighbours. This tradition was reportedly practiced in Utrecht, the Netherlands, as early as 1163. It is now believed that the practice was ignited by a lowly party of nuns from an unnamed French village. At first, they travelled only to the run-down shacks or sleeping places of penniless children, stealthily leaving behind small parcels of candy before vanishing into the night. As operations expanded, nuns began to slink into the unlocked doors of vacant homes, packing satchels of candy into the shoes of the well-behaved, and a single switch of willow into the boots of troublesome children. How these nuns kept track of delinquent children is unknown. One can only assume that some kind of collaboration between the parents and the nuns took place. More often than not, the nuns preferred to remain anonymous. When asked about the source of these mysterious gifts, this was their only response: it must have been St. Nicholas. Not all the nuns delivered treats. On the morning of St. Nicholas' Day, poverty-stricken families awoke to baskets of bread and other foodstuffs, as well as packages of clothing, and at times a few silver coins wrapped in rags. Occasionally, the nuns also lodged a single tangerine or apple, a rather costly fruit back in the day, into the heels of stockings, and filled the remaining space with a medley of nuts. The trend of giving gifts on St. Nicholas' Day eventually caught on with other regions in the Low Countries, spreading to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and England, and even reaching Romania. The French nuns were permanently substituted with the visiting spirit of St. Nicholas, painted as a rail-thin, wrinkled wraith dressed in a scarlet bishop's robe. By the late 13th century, sweets and other treats were retired in favour of larger ornaments and novelties of special significance. This next phase of gift-giving, historians theorize, was prompted by the Catholic Church, with the intention of incorporating the presents extended by the 3 Magi in the story of the Nativity into the holidays. Enterprising vendors sought to capitalize on the new trend by erecting St. Nicholas markets, which were populated with vibrant stalls filled with toys, trinkets, and treats. European royalty also began to partake in the gift-giving tradition. In 1377, the court subjects of France's King Charles V received gilded chalices filled to the top with myrrh, incense, and blocks of gold. On New Year's Day, subjects who could afford it presented their monarchs with another set of handsome gifts. Fortunately for these subjects, they did not leave empty-handed. Instead, they walked out of the king's chambers with either a silver-gilt basin or a satchel of coins. Although St. Nicholas' Day had become synonymous with generosity and gift-giving, he was still a far cry from the rosy-cheeked, happy-go-lucky Santa Claus of the 21st century. Children in the devoutly Catholic portions of Europe dreaded the winter arrival of the ghostly saint, for he was designed as a virtuous but vengeful bogeyman who preyed on wicked children. In Germany there were 2 gift-bearers bound together by a good cop, bad cop dynamic: St. Nicholas and his sidekick Knecht Ruprecht, farmhand Rupert. Rupert, wearing a dirt-brown, sometimes lace-white hooded cloak, edged with black fur, trawled the streets in the dead of the night, filling his gut with misbehaving children. In Switzerland and the Netherlands, Nicholas shoved bare children into the infinite space within his sack, with all the care of a litter collector equipped with a trash picker. The pulsating sack of children was then dragged deep into the Black Forest, never to be seen again. In certain parts of Austria, religious parents went even further to drive home the importance of proper conduct. On his feast day, the saint, garbed in full bishopric regalia, banged on the front door of wicker children, demanding to be let in. The panicking children made themselves scarce, curling up under the bed or inside of closets. Once the coast was deemed clear, they peeked out from their hiding spaces, only to be seized and hauled into the next room by the awaiting bishop. The bishop then loomed over the cowering children and swung the switches in his fist forward in one swift motion, stopping short just above the head of the sniffling child. "Misbehave again," the bishop snarled, and he would be back the following year. Whether they were presents or rod-beatings, St. Nicholas always delivered. Teachers employed at Christian schools, particularly those affiliated with the saint, also began to expand on the tradition. Every 6th of December they seated themselves behind their desks, dressed as the divine saint. One by one, the queue of pupils stepped forward to hear their verdict. Students with satisfactory to excellent grades and good deportment were rewarded with sweets or a bit of spending money. Those with substandard scores and poor conduct were made to stay after dismissal and beaten with birch rods. These punishments had indeed become a principal constituent of the St. Nicholas Day traditions, but the Roman Catholic Church reminded Christians not to lose sight of the celebration's paramount message. Demonstrating one's love for their children and one's appreciation for their exemplary behavior was well and good, but it was more important for the rich to share their wealth with the needy. As Ambrose of Milan, an associate of St. Nicholas, once put it, "You are not making a gift of your possessions to the poor person. You are handing over to him what is his. For what has been given in common for the use of all, you have arrogated to yourself. The world has been given to us all, and not only to the rich." While the concept of deliberately urging one's children to place their faith in a fictitious character might seem relatively strange or archaic to some, the aforementioned evidence indicates that this brand of trickery had no age. As time progressed, scheming parents across Europe continued to keep up the pretense, and they began to modernize the original traditions associated with St. Nicholas Day. A 15th-century Swiss author, Rudolf Hospinian, noted, "It was the custom for parents, on the vigil of St. Nicholas, to convey secretly presents of various kinds to their little sons and daughters, who were taught to believe that they owed them to the kindness of St. Nicholas and his train, who, going up and down among the towns and villages, came in at the windows, though they were shut, and distributed them." The same sentiment is also found in a poem penned by 16th-century German dramatist Thomas Neo Georgus. "And when they every one at night in senseless sleep are cast, both apples, nuts, and pears they bring, and other things besides, as caps and shoes and petticoats, which secretly they hide, and in the morning found they say that this St. Nicholas brought." The momentum of the St. Nicholas-inspired gift-giving movement began to decline in 1517, the dawn of the Protestant Reformation. Catholics were relentlessly chastised for their undue worship of the canonized, mainly towards the miracle maven St. Nicholas. The Industrial Revolution, the rise of Puritanism in Europe, and criticism of the veneration of saints, which included special dedications to St. Nicholas and St. Wenceslaus, overshadowed the feast in Europe. The Calvinist theologian Wojciech Siowierz wrote, "It is a foolish and pointless custom to fill children's shoes with all sorts of sweets and nonsense. What else is this but sacrifice to an idol? Those who do it do not understand what true religion is." In their History of New York, Edwin Burroughs and Mike Wallace write that since the Reformation, Protestants dismissed Christmas as another artifact of Catholic ignorance and deception. Not only was the New Testament silent on the date of Christ's birth, they noted, but the Church had picked December the 25th to coincide with the beginning of the winter solstice, an event traditionally associated with wild plebeian bacchanals and challenges to authority. Martin Luther, the seminal leader of the Reformation, officially outlawed all festivities commemorating the saint in Protestant territories. That being said, Luther had no delusions about the ban he was enforcing, and he was well aware of the furtive celebrations that would inexorably take place out of sight. In a bid to fill the gap of a celebratory figure during winter time, Luther spun together the story of Christ Kindlein. Christ Kindlein, otherwise known as Christ Kindle, or simply Christ Kind, directly translates into Christ Child. Initially, Christ Kindle was depicted as a chubby, cherub-like Jesus in toddler form. German Christians, however, could not be sold on the idea of an infant winged Christ flitting from house to house in the middle of winter, for no such story or mention of a gift-bearing Christ is referenced in the Gospel. To rectify this, a new character was manufactured. Henceforth, Christ Kindle was no longer Christ, but an androgynous, nameless baby angel with butterscotch blonde ringlets, twinkling blue eyes, and fluffy golden wings. The iconography of Christ Kindle differed in various parts of Protestant Europe, including territories in what is now Austria, Liechtenstein, Hungary, Switzerland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. In some versions, Christ Kindle was depicted as a young, wingless girl, clothed in a hooded fur coat, trudging through dense blankets of snow. A deer was sometimes seen trotting alongside her, a hefty basket of toys and fruits balanced on his snout. Other times, Christ Kindle carried out the mission on her lonesome, pushing a wheelbarrow of goodies through curtains of falling snow. Christ Kindle arrived not on the 6th of December, but on the 24th of the month, the last day of the Advent. Presents were neatly stacked underneath the Weihnachtsbaum, an evergreen tree adorned with lighted candles, now considered the precursor of the Christmas tree. As was customary during the time, Protestant parents advised their children against conspiring to catch Christ Kindle in the act. The gift-giving angel, they claimed, skipped the houses of nosy young ones. Only when they hear the toll of the bell, hooked up and operated by their parents, did they come rushing out of their rooms, making a beeline for the gifts under the Weihnachtsbaum. Ironically, another legend attributes the invention of the Christmas tree, or perhaps the Christianization of the Yule log, to Martin Luther, who was supposedly walking through the snowy forest one Christmas Eve, saw the beautiful stars shining through the branches of a fir tree, and was so moved that he took one to his house to show his son the genuine Christmas message, that Christ was the light of the world. The origin of this unmistakably apocryphal tale is possibly a painting by an artist named C.A. Schwertberth, which shows the leader of the Reformation and his family sitting around a beautiful Christmas tree. Santa Claus in medieval Europe. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. More variations of St. Nicholas continued to crop up all over Europe in the centuries that followed. 16th-century English diarist Henry Machen recounted the enthralling St. Nicholas Day celebrations that unfolded on the streets of London in the 1550s. People costumed in Nicholas's bishopric robes went abroad in most parts of London, singing after the old fashion, received among good people into their houses, and had much good cheer as ever they had in many places. Interestingly enough, though the terms Father Christmas and Santa Claus are interchangeable in the United Kingdom today, the first Father Christmas and St. Nicholas were not one and the same. The nameless forerunner of Father Christmas, named as Grandfather Christmas here, so as not to cause confusion, made his first debut in the pagan lore and midwinter customs of the ancient British peoples. In spite of what his name might suggest, King Frost was the heralder of springtime, a towering white-bearded figure draped in a floor-length emerald-green cloak, ornamented with a single wreath of ivy, holly, or mistletoe. When Britain entered the Anglo-Saxon period in the 5th century CE, The character of Grandfather Christmas was merged with that of Saxon Father Time, also known as King Frost or King Winter. Dawn Copeman of Time Travel Britain explained, "Someone would dress up as King Winter and be welcomed into homes where he would sit near the fire and be given something to eat and drink. It was thought that by being kind to King Winter, the people would get something good in return, a milder winter. Thus, Father Christmas became associated with receiving good things." The final ingredients that would complete the medieval Father Christmas came with the 11th century invasion of the Normans, who brought with them the stories of the legendary Saint Nicholas. The earliest tangible reference to Father Christmas, however, is dated to a 15th century carol, authored by the rector of Plymtree, Richard Smart. "Noel, Noel, Noel, who is there that singeth so? I am here, Sir Christmas. Welcome, my Lord Christmas. Welcome to us all, both more and less. Come near, Noel." It was only then that Father Christmas became the embodiment of the spirit of Christmas. During the Tudor and Stuart eras, Father, Sir, and Captain Christmases were summoned to the late winter parties and Christmas displays hosted by public establishments and in the spacious parlours of the upper class. In 1638, Worcestershire-born dramatist Thomas Nabbs produced the first visual of the synthesized Father Christmas in his court masque, the Spring's Glory, a dishevelled, rotund, and pipe-smoking old man with small, smiling eyes and a whisker and beard combo, the colour of fresh-fallen snow, dressed in a furred gown and cap. On Christmas Eve, Father Christmas galloped all over town on his donkey or mare, sneaking small presents into stockings and pillowcases, dangling over the fireplace, or on the headboards above sleeping children. As a token of their gratitude, children prepared for Father Christmas a slice of mince pie, accompanied by a tumbler of brandy. Alas, halfway into the 17th century, ultra-conservative British Puritans, who could no longer stomach the overindulgence and intemperate carousing linked to Christmas, banned the holiday along with Father Christmas altogether. Even so, devotees continued to pay homage to Father Christmas while taking their operations underground. The character was quietly inserted into wintertime mummers' plays, seasonal folk plays performed by troupes of actors known as mummers or guisers. The following is an opening line frequently used in such plays. "In comes I, old Father Christmas," the actor announced as he took centre stage. "Be I welcome, or be I not? I hope old Father Christmas will never be forgot." Besides these cult dramas, Father Christmas also made several cameos in the articles of back-alley newspapers. Authors of these newspapers in question refer to him as Old Christmas, which was symbolic of the people's nostalgia towards the forbidden holiday. Pamphlets printed by enthusiasts and so-called recusant Catholics on the sly called for the return of Father Christmas. The following is a passage from one of these pamphlets. "Any man or woman that can give any knowledge or tell any tidings of an old, grey-bearded gentleman called Christmas, who was wont to be a very familiar guest, and visit all sorts of people, both poor and rich, and used to appear in glittering gold, silk, and silver in the court, and in all shapes in the theatre in Whitehall, and had ringing, feasts, and jollity in all places, both in the city and in the country, for his coming. Whoever can tell what is become of him, or where he may be found, let him bring him back again to England." The prohibition on Father Christmas was eventually lifted, but it was only when Britain entered the Victorian age that the Christmas spirit was reanimated in full swing. Meanwhile, 323 miles to the east of London, Dutch children across the Netherlands patiently awaited the arrival of Santa Claus. By the 17th century, trees were a common sight throughout northern Europe. An unidentified 35-year-old man who visited Strasbourg in 1605 left this description in his travel journal. "At Christmas time in Strasbourg, people put up fir trees in their living room, then hang roses, cut in papers of many colours, 40 apples, wafer, and gold-plated decorations." That said, this does not mean people were placing pine trees upright in the middle of a living room. In some parts of Austria and Germany, the tree was hung upside down in a corner of the room and decorated with apples, walnuts, and strips of colored paper. Others were nothing more than thick branches hung from windows and doors. There was still at least a century to go before the symbol took its present shape. Around this time, historians can also trace the first mentions of Sinterklaas in Europe, an amalgamation of St. Nicholas, Father Winter, and possibly Odin. It is not clear at what point the Christian bishop merged with the winter character, and possibly with the Norse god, but most of the elements of the legend of Sinterklaas seem too foreign to any Christian tradition, even considering that the lives of the saints acquired fantastic traits during the Middle Ages. According to folklore, Sinterklaas rides through the heavens on a horse, followed by a cohort of black or demonic helpers who inform him about human behavior. In other versions, Sinterklaas arrives in the villages accompanied by a black helper named Zwart Piet, Black Pete, a diabolical character who inflicted corporal punishments on children or kidnapped them to take them to a place of torment. On the evening of December the 5th, Dutch children pored over scripture for hours on end prior to the advent of Sinterklaas, for the purpose of his visit was to catechize them on their biblical knowledge. It was absolutely essential that they pass the test with flying colors, for failure meant the irreversible damnation of their souls. About 5 minutes before the arrival of Sinterklaas, the children of the household formed a tidy queue behind the front door. Following a short hymn, exalting him for his unparalleled benignity, the door was cracked open. A withered hand reached in through the gap of the door and threw a handful of sweets down the hallway. Then, without warning, the door swung open, and in stepped Sinterklaas, usually played by a parent, relative, or neighbor. The scowling Sinterklaas strode into the parlor and circled the children, the wine-red cape tied over his white bishop's alb fluttering behind him. After a lengthy stare, the jittery children were each ordered to pull up a chair. He then paced back and forth in front of them, rhythmically slapping a birch rod against an open palm as he quizzed them on random ideas of the Bible. Who disobeyed God, and was, as a result, transformed into a pillar of salt? What sea did Moses part? Recite the 10 Commandments. For every accurate answer, the children were rewarded with another handful of sweets, and at times oranges. In contrast, each error was met with a hearty slap on the hand, or the child's behind. Children who were unable to summon up even one correct answer were sentenced to an eternity in the blazing bowels of hell. Children who failed 2 years in a row were crammed into Sinterklaas's filthy sack and prematurely dragged to Lucifer's lair. Spanish Aragon conquered Bari along with the rest of the territories within the Norman kingdom of the Two Sicilies in 1442. Holland followed suit when it allowed itself to become absorbed into the kingdom of the Spanish Habsburgs a little over a century later. Shortly after the transition, Dutch Catholic bishops began to spend the summer in Spain, and the spirit of St. Nicholas, they claimed, journeyed to the verdant Spanish countryside with them. At first, a major obstacle prevented Sinterklaas from breaking away from his duties. He could not peel his eyes away from the Dutch children, so as to keep his behavior log accurate and up-to-date. As such, Sinterklaas employed a young Moorish fellow named Zwart Piet, Black Pete, and tasked him with monitoring the children and updating the records in his temporary absence. Later, Zwart Piet began to accompany Sinterklaas on his gift-giving expeditions, carrying in his own satchel the birch rods for naughty and ungodly children. Anthropology professor Benjamin K. Swartz, Jr. described the character of Black Pete in further detail. In function, Black Pete serves as a Dutch non-pagan version of the German Knecht Ruprecht, farmhand Rupert, a black sprite helping St. Nicholas as a disciplinarian for children. Ruprecht appears in shaggy sack on back and rod in hand in the 16th and 17th centuries. The English counterpart of Knecht Ruprecht, Robin Goodfellow, is documented as early as 1489 and had a loud laugh of ho ho ho. Indeed, numerous supernatural little people were associated with St. Nicholas at this time in German folklore, contributing to his eventual elfin status and collaboration with elf helpers. 19th century Swedes, perhaps taking a page out of the Book of the British Christians in the 1550s, took to the streets with dramatic and highly coloured parades aimed to elevate the Christmas spirit. Court subjects and servants from the retinue of King Oscar II, some faces coated in stage makeup and others concealed behind intricately detailed masks, sang Christmas carols and swung their baskets of gifts in their arms. The arresting array of costumes was endless, ranging from royals and soldiers to sailors and spooky harlequins. The central figure of the Swedish gift-giving pantheon was Julbocken, a Christmas goat that first infiltrated the mainstream via Petter och Lotta's Jul, Peter and Lotta's Christmas, published by author Elsa Beskow. The magical goat, most likely another derivative of Knecht Ruprecht, was portrayed as a mythical character who presented gifts and goodwill to well-behaved children. The Tomten was another prominent character in the pantheon. Tomtens were tiny and tubby gnome-like creatures with curly white beards and pointed red caps, who dwelt in the crawl space of each Swedish home, protecting all the children and animals within the vicinity from evil spirits and other negative energy. Around mid-December, the Tomtens relocated to the attic, the hollow space underneath staircases, and other nooks and crannies of the house. Once all members of the family were snugly tucked into their beds, the mischievous gnomes squirmed out of their hiding places and stowed loose treats and valuable trinkets into hard-to-find crevices, setting in place a sort of treasure hunt for the family. If the family provoked the Tomten, however, they retaliated. The family would then find themselves the targets of mild but infuriating pranks. That is, missing socks, gloves, toys, or the premature souring of milk, and they would be cursed with a spate of bad luck. By the 1800s, the two characters had been fused into one, the Yule Tomten, also known as Tomten or Nisse. Yule Tomten was a stern, no-nonsense shape-shifter who took on the form of a short, crooked-backed gentleman, clothed in a long, tattered coat. His basket of gifts was mounted on the back of his pet ram. On Christmas Eve, Yule Tomten pounded on every front door. "Have the children inside been good?" he boomed from the other side of the door. When Yule Tomten received confirmation from the parents of the household, he briskly slipped through the door and delivered the presents, supposedly darting in and out of the door in the blink of an eye. To express their gratitude, children whipped up bowls of savoury porridge and platters of almond and butter and left them by the main entrances of their homes. Yule Tomten could also be tided over with offerings of tobacco or liquor. Those who failed to do so were at risk of incurring the wrath of the pint-sized gift-giver. Not only would they receive the cold shoulder from the Yule Tomten the following year, they were subjected to cruel tricks and practical jokes. Additionally, in Sweden and certain parts of Germany, people began to exchange gifts they called Julklapp, as a kind of obeisance to St. Nicholas. Julklapp were typically pendant necklaces, rings studded with precious stones, or some other glittering gift. The presents were swaddled in a silk cloth and placed in multiple boxes in increasing sizes, creating a Russian nesting doll or babushka effect. As dictated by tradition, the gift-bearer knocked on the door of the recipient's home, and when the recipient came to meet them, the gift-bearer hurled the Julklapp through the door and ran off as quickly as their legs could carry them, so as to keep their identity veiled. The mingling of St. Nicholas and Christmas customs over time only resulted in more charming traditions. In France, Père Noël, the French rendition of St. Nicholas, was presented as a slender, elderly gentleman dressed in a baggy, hooded red robe, trimmed with white fur. His presents were not lugged around in a sack, but instead a hot, a hand-woven basket, similar to those carried by grape harvesters. On the 24th of December, French children dusted off their boots and sabots, clogs chiseled out of wood, filled them with carrots and apple slices for Père Noël's donkey, Guy, and set them down by the fireplace. For Père Noël they prepared a glass of fine wine or calvados, a type of apple or pear brandy, produced in the Normandy region of France. Contrary to popular belief, the mythical gift-bearer was not always a male figure. Take into account, for instance, Lady Befana of Italian lore. When the three wise men ventured out from the Middle East in search of the newborn king, they relied on the Star of Bethlehem as their compass. Their extensive journey took them across numerous towns and countries, among them an obscure and unmarked town in Italy. The inhabitants of every village they chanced upon flocked towards them in throngs to escort them to their destination. When the magnetic magi passed by the Italian village, all the villagers spilled into the streets and tagged along en masse, joining the wise men's fast-swelling cortege, except for one little old lady. "Come quick," her neighbors called out to her. "The three magi are here." "Do not wait for me," the old lady replied, waving them off with her broom. "There is plenty of housework still to be done, but I have no doubt I will finish before your departure." The old lady continued to work around her house, sweeping, scrubbing, and cleaning, oblivious to the falling, then rising sun. When she finally completed her housework, she set down her broom and wiped her hands on the sides of her patchy dress, admiring the spotlessness of her own handiwork. Only then did she take heed of the piercing pin-drop silence, and the beam of early morning sunlight caressing her cheek. The old lady snatched up the gift-box on the supper table and hobbled out the door, broom still in hand, but the villagers were long gone. La Befana, as she has since been christened, has yet to complete her quest for the newborn king. Every year on the 6th of January she hops on her broomstick and flies across the continent, stopping at the home of every child along the way. She fishes one of her presents out of her basket, which she wears like a backpack, and shimmies down the chimney, stuffing a pile of knickknacks in hand-knitted stockings, or laying them under the Christmas tree. Still unable to locate the newborn king, she bestows a present upon every child in the hopes that she will finally find him. When the story of Befana was first established sometime in the 13th century, children were ordered to stay in their beds. Those who flouted their parents' warnings, it is said, received a hard smack on their behinds from her broomstick. To thank Befana for her troubles, each family rustled up a platter of sandwiches and other finger foods, accompanied by a glass of red wine. Italian children spent the last week of December knitting stockings and composing wish lists, as well as letters addressed to Befana, detailing their behavior over the past year. Well-mannered children could expect to find pretty dolls, handmade puppets, and wooden novelties in their stockings. Unruly children, on the other hand, received stockings stuffed with garlic, coal, and old onion bulbs. Santa in America. Santa Claus is anyone who loves another and seeks to make them happy, who gives himself, by thought or word or deed, in every gift that he bestows, who shares his joys with those who are sad, whose hand is never closed against the needy, who recognizes a comrade and brother in every man he meets upon life's common road. Edwin Osgood Grover, 1912. St. Nicholas's winged horse first touched down in the New World in the early 17th century, alongside the Dutch and German colonists that came to settle in North America. Few records have survived, but historians believe that the gift-giving traditions surrounding the magnanimous saint were first practiced by Dutch families, predominantly in New Amsterdam, now New York City. German, Belgian, and Polish colonists stationed in Pennsylvania may have also celebrated the feast day of St. Nicholas. On the 23rd of December, 1773, England-born James Rivington's New York Gazetteer published an article covering the Boston Tea Party. In it, he mentioned that clans of Dutch families had convened at a local tavern to honor St. Nicholas. Last Monday, the anniversary of St. Nicholas, otherwise called St. A. Claus, was celebrated at Protestant Hall at Mr. Waldron's, where a great number of the sons of that ancient saint celebrated the day with great joy and festivity. Rivington was, therefore, the first to publish an article in North America that mentioned St. Nicholas and his feast day by name. As one can gather, he also made the first reference to Santa Claus, identifying him as St. A. Claus, possibly a misspelling of the Dutch Santa Claus. St. Nicholas disappeared from papers and was not again chronicled until approximately 20 years later, when his traditions were resurrected by a New Yorker by the name of John Pintard. Pintard, a merchant, philanthropist, active Freemason, and secretary for the Academy of Fine Arts, hinted at his intrigue with St. Nicholas in his private journal in 1793 and 1797, but it was not until the first years of the 19th century that he took his movement off paper. In 1804, Pintard became one of the 11 founders of the New York Historical Society, said to be the first museum in the state. Pintard recognized the importance of stockpiling and preserving journals, books, eyewitness accounts, and other records of their history, saving them from dust and obscurity. The cynicism of these men had been hardened by their experiences during the American Revolution and the British invasion of New York City in 1776. They longed for simpler times and were distraught by the immorality and godlessness that seemed to define New York norms. St. Nicholas was unofficially adopted as the Society's mascot, a personification of the sweet, uncomplicated days of yesteryear. In 1809, Pintard gave the following toast at the Society's annual dinner celebrations. To the memory of St. Nicholas, may the virtuous habits and simple manners of our Dutch ancestors be not lost in the luxuries and refinements of the present time. The impassioned mentions of St. Nicholas that Pintard made at the dinner table were not lost on his family and friends. Eventually, most in his family grew weary of the subject, and could only afford to part with lukewarm interest at best, humouring him with half-hearted replies. 2 of Pintard's closest comrades, however, remained interested: Manhattan-based author Washington Irving and Episcopalian minister and part-time wordsmith Clement Clark Moore. The inquisitive Irving first called attention to the figure in January 1808. That month he wrote in Salamagundi, a literary magazine of his creation, renowned for lampooning influential politicians, the noted St. Nicholas, vulgarly called Santa Claus, of all the saints in the calendar, the most venerated by the true Hollanders and their unsophisticated descendants. The sarcasm dripping from this excerpt is a common theme present in many of Irving's works, but they are at the same time laced with clues that point to his unspoken but genuine love for the winter season. He made a second, more elaborate reference to Santa Claus in his satirical book, History of New York. The book was published under the Dutch pseudonym of Diedrich Knickerbocker on the 6th of December 1809, hence the manuscript's alternative title, Knickerbocker's History of New York, from the beginning of the world to the end of the Dutch dynasty. In the book, St. Nicholas was acknowledged as the patron saint of New Amsterdam, and was described as a jolly old Dutchman nicknamed Santa Claus, who parked his wagon on rooftops and slid down chimneys, with gifts for sleeping children on his feast day. In an effort to top the previous year's celebrations, Pintard commissioned artist Alexander Anderson to produce a delicately detailed woodcut illustration of St. Nicholas, which could then be passed around by the guests at the dinner party. Alexander delivered, and on the 6th of December 1810, Pintard eagerly showed off the 2-panelled woodcut. On the left was a portrait of Nicholas as a bishop, depicted as a leathery-faced, bald, and haloed gentleman with a tangled white beard, flourishing a birch rod in one hand and a bulging sack of gold coins in the other. On the right was an image of 2 children, a well-kept young girl with a sweet smile, the good child, and a crying boy with an untucked shirt and rumpled clothes, the bad child. The children were perched on the top of a crackling fireplace, flanked by 2 stockings. The inscription underneath these images read, St. Nicholas, my dear good friend, to serve you ever was my end. If you will now me something give, I'll serve you ever while I live. A fortnight later, the New York Spectator published a poem saluting the same good, holy man. Both the poem and the woodcut contained Easter eggs, hinting at the tradition's Dutch origins, such as the oranges spotted in the stockings of the well-behaved child. This is believed to have been done in deference to the Orange Nassau royals. Pintard and Irving had successfully turned St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, a former cult figure, into a household name, but his link to Christmas was still non-existent. Christmas had been a fixture in the New World since the colonial era, but little was holy about its attached festivities. People wreaked cheerful havoc on the streets, utilizing the holiday as an excuse to consume barrels of liquor and drunkenly fire off their revolvers. Both Pintard and Irving voiced their disapproval of the holiday, which had strayed from its true meaning on multiple occasions. Pintard, for one, insisted that it be restricted to a family-oriented winter holiday for polite society. Irving parroted Pintard's sentiments in Sketchbook, published in 1819. By describing a family eating a scrumptious Christmas dinner, he was reinforcing and supporting the then unpopular concept of a family-friendly celebration. Minister Clement Clarke Moore was pleased with the growing popularity of St. Nicholas, but he was even more pleased when he stumbled upon an obvious yet untrodden path. In 1823, Moore published an account of a visit from St. Nicholas, also published under "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." In this endearing poem, Moore purposely tied the arrival of St. Nicholas to Christmas Eve, which he hoped would further validate the cause of Pintard and Irving. Supposedly, Moore got his inspiration during a shopping outing in a sleigh, and he based his Santa Claus on a Dutchman who lived in Chelsea. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled! His dimples, how merry! His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. St. Nicholas was no longer a glowering, vindictive phantom in a perpetually foul mood, but rather a jovial, dimple-cheeked and red-nosed old fellow with soft, shimmering eyes. Moore's interpretation of St. Nicholas was merciful and sweet-tempered, equipped with a round belly that shook like a bowl full of jelly, with every note of his musical laugh. Several other passages in the poem contain vivid descriptions of his appearance, and new details of his backstory were also disclosed. From the following one can gather that St. Nicholas was small, no larger than an elf. But a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. The names of St. Nicholas's reindeer, as well as his landing and docking methods, were also revealed. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. And he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen. On Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. In less than 20 years, the anonymous poem, freely reproduced in every newspaper in the winter season, was known throughout the United States, and from there it would spread to the rest of the English world. Genteel New Yorkers embraced Moore's homey, child-centered version of Christmas, as if they had been doing it all their lives. Clement Clarke Moore took credit for the poem years later, but some literary critics think the real author was a man named Henry Livingston, a farmer who wrote poems and published anonymously. Livingston's adult children later recalled that their father had read them those verses when they were little children. Regardless, in the decades that followed, more authors took it upon themselves to further flesh out the backstory of St. Nicholas. In 1849, missionary and writer James Rees published a short story entitled A Christmas Legend, adding Mrs. Claus to the mix for the first time. The plot revolves around a stranded couple that raps on the door of a random family and requests refuge from the cold. Towards the end of the story, the family discovers that the strangers, whom they initially suspected were Mr. and Mrs. Claus, were actually long-lost relatives in disguise. Observant authors noted the positive reception surrounding the new character, and some of them quickly cashed in on the hype. Over the next couple of years, Mrs. Claus became a recurring character in numerous books, poems, and songs devoted to St. Nicholas. The prototype Mrs. Claus was a memorable but unimaginative background character with a quirky fashion sense and a penchant for Christmas parties. In some accounts, Mrs. Claus was accounted in various shades of red, while in E.C. Gardner's essay, A Hickory Backlog, she turns heads with her forest green plaid dress. In the 1878 children's bestseller, Lil's Travels in Santa Claus Land and Other Stories, Mrs. Claus was portrayed as a doting wife and faithful secretary. The protagonist, Lil, described her as a lady sitting by a golden desk writing in a large book. The husband and wife worked as a team, with Santa relating the behavior of the children on the opposite end of his telescope to his wife, who in turn recorded his observations in a notebook. When depicted by female authors, Mrs. Claus was as kind and intelligent as she was opinionated and outspoken. In Catherine Lee Bates' poem, Goody Santa Claus on a Sleigh Ride, published in 1889, Mrs. Claus demands to be allowed aboard Santa's sleigh with the intention of delivering the toys herself. She pleads her case in the following snippet. Home to womankind is suited? Nonsense, good man. Let our fruited orchards answer for the value of a woman out of doors. While I tie your fur cap closer, I will kiss your ruddy chin. I'm so pleased I fall to singing, just as sleigh bells take to ringing. Are the cloud-spun lap robes ready? Tira-lira, tuck me in. Moore's Christmas poem was a huge sensation, so much so that national newspapers collectively reprinted it whenever the holidays came along. Thomas Nast, a cartoonist and caricaturist on Harper's Weekly Retainer, was especially taken with Moore's version of St. Nicholas. Stimulated by the varied but compelling details of St. Nicholas's backstory floating within the literary world, Nast rolled up his sleeves and went to work on developing an interpretation of his own. Nast's first illustration of Santa Claus was published in the January 3, 1863 edition of Harper's Weekly. In this politically charged picture, captioned Santa Claus in Camp, the Union-supporting anti-Confederate Santa is clothed in a fur-trimmed coat, decorated all over with white patriotic stars and striped pants bearing the colors of the American flag. Standing before Santa was a crowd of adult soldiers, one of whom is seen admiring the socks he was gifted. Nast had unwittingly started a new chapter in Santa Claus's history in the United States. The figure's religious ties to the original saint had been stripped away to give way to a secular character who promoted cheer, goodwill, and patriotism during the winter season. Tales popped up that President Lincoln himself had hired Nast to produce the illustration as recruitment propaganda, but regardless of how it happened, the effect it had was undeniable, and Lincoln was so impressed by the results that he called Santa the best recruiting sergeant the North ever had. On the other side of the fight, parents used the character to emphasize the oppressive strength of the Union blockade. Not even Santa could get past the darn Yankee blockade. Nast eventually eliminated the blatantly patriotic elements in his later illustrations of Santa Claus. Santa's patriotic ensemble was retired, and in its stead was a plain coat and pants in solid colors, along with a furry hat. He was no longer a spokesperson for the Union, but once again a gentle father figure. To be fair, children around the globe had always been skeptical about the existence of Santa Claus, a conveniently evasive figure who was unreasonably invested in their conduct. 3 years before the 19th century came to a close, one young girl took the initiative to seek out answers for herself. In the early weeks of September, the office of the New York Sun received a short but powerful letter from 8-year-old Virginia O Hanlon. The lead editorial writer, Frances Pharcellus Church, was particularly moved by O Hanlon's inquiry, and O Hanlon's letter and Church's response was published on September the 21st, 1897. The exchange would soon break records as the most reprinted editorial of all time. O Hanlon's letter read, "Dear Editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says, if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Church replied, Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists, as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. Santa goes commercial. They err who think Santa Claus enters through the chimney. He enters through the heart. Charles W. Howard, founder of Charles W. Howard Santa Claus School. To those who knew him, Scottish-American businessman James Edgar was the reincarnation of St. Nicholas himself. In 1878, shortly after he relocated to Boston, Massachusetts, Edgar built from the ground up a dry goods store. It was aptly named the Boston Store, but it was later rebranded as Edgar's. Not only was Edgar a good-humored and highly spirited individual with an infectious laugh, anyone who came across Edgar, they said, benefited from his boundless generosity. In contrast to the cruel, money-grubbing employers who forced their employees to work overtime for no extra pay, the Boston Store was open from morning to evening only 3 times a week. As such, the employees were permitted to close up shop early in the afternoon 4 days of the week, so the remainder of the day could be spent with their families. Edgar also had the best interests of his customers at heart. He allowed poorer customers to place a certain number of items on layaway, and granted a 4% monthly interest to whatever sum they could afford for the deposit. The philanthropic Edgar was also a fantastic neighbor, one committed to serving his community. He regularly footed the medical bills of the indigent children in his city, all the while keeping his identity hidden. Above all, Edgar was a fun-loving and whimsical character who adored children as much as he enjoyed dressing up. Photographs preserved by loved ones and published in local newspapers show him in various costumes, from George Washington to Uncle Sam. On special occasions, such as the 4th of July, he climbed up to the rooftop of the Boston Store and tossed pennies and other small trinkets to the giddy crowd below. For the first few years after the opening of the Boston Store, Edgar added an extra splash of color to the Christmas season by donning his favorite clown costume. He continued this self-made tradition until 1890, when he rediscovered Nast's Santa Claus in an old issue of Harper's Weekly. That same afternoon, he headed downtown and employed a dressmaker to recreate Santa's costume, as seen in Nast's illustration, specifically tailored to his dimensions. Edgar later recalled the thoughts that swirled in his head, saying, "I have never been able to understand why the great gentleman lives at the North Pole. He is so far away. He is only able to see the children 1 day a year. He should live closer to them." Once the Santa suit was completed, Edgar returned downtown to pick up his costume. He then drew up and published a notice announcing a meet and greet with Santa Claus at the Boston Store. When the day arrived, Edgar was astounded by the dizzyingly winding line of parents and children waiting outside the door. The unconventional entrepreneur is now affectionately remembered as the world's first department store Santa. Jake Rosson of Mental Floss described the results. The notion of a living Santa was so intriguing that Edgar's store attracted visitors from as far away as New York and Rhode Island. By the following year, several other stores across the country had picked up on the idea, which helped bolster foot traffic and sales. Unlike many of his successors, however, Edgar never had a place to sit and idle. He roamed his store, actively seeking out children so they could confide in him. Taking heed of the secular Santa's popularity, which had experienced something of a resurgence in recent years, charity organizations also took to adopting the fictional character as their ambassador. The addition of the famously munificent spokesmodel, they hoped, would encourage more to donate and incentivize regular benefactors to increase their contributions. In 1891, Salvation Army Captain Joseph McPhee directed a project that aimed to provide Christmas dinner to 1,000 disadvantaged citizens over the holidays free of charge. As he was brainstorming possible ways to finance the project, he began to reminisce about his days as a sailor back in Liverpool. Located at the port of Stage Landing, McPhee recollected, was Simpson's Pot, a large empty iron kettle that received coins from passers-by. At the end of the week, the coins were collected and distributed among the poor. The day after that thought came to him, McPhee purchased an iron kettle of a similar size and installed it at the Oakland Ferry Landing by San Francisco's Market Street. McPhee's pot, now known as the Red Kettle, was an instant hit, allowing McPhee to surpass his target. By 1897, the Red Kettle tradition had traveled to the East Coast, particularly the Boston region. That December, branches of the Salvation Army across the United States orchestrated fundraisers that resulted in the distribution of 150,000 free Christmas dinners. The Salvation Army also promoted goodwill by hiring unemployed men, dressing them up in Santa suits, and tasking them with soliciting donations in the streets. In 1929, Captain William Winkepaw, a floatplane pilot from Maine, launched the Flying Santa program, in which planes delivered gifts and care packages to lighthouse keepers and folks dwelling in similarly isolated areas along the coast of New England. The Society's official website, Friends of Flying Santa, described the origins of the program in further detail. It began on December the 25th, 1929, when Captain Winkepaw loaded his plane with a dozen packages containing newspapers, magazines, coffee, candy, and other items. They were small luxuries and common staples that could make living on an isolated island a little more bearable. He flew to lighthouses around the Rockland area and dropped these modest gifts to the lighthouse families. Never realizing just how well his gesture of Christmas goodwill would be received, he flew home to spend the rest of the day with his family. The Coca-Cola Company's depiction of the modern-day Santa Claus would be inaccurate. In fact, they weren't even the first beverage company to feature Santa in their marketing campaigns. White Rock Beverages, which originated in Waukesha, Wisconsin, bottled fresh spring water purportedly derived from the medicinal fount near native Potawatomi settlements, and on December the 19th, 1915, White Rock used Santa to push sales for their mineral water for the first time, as seen in an advertisement published by the San Francisco Examiner. In the illustration, Santa is seen behind the wheel of a tractor carrying presents in neatly stacked White Rock cartons. The White Rock Santa reappeared in the New York Herald on December the 10th, 1916, this time flying a biplane loaded with presents on its wings. In 1923, the White Rock Santa was featured for the first time in a color advertisement in the December 12th issue of Life magazine. Here, Santa is seen leaning back in a stuffed armchair, examining a naughty or nice list. Open bottles of White Rock water, White Rock-branded ginger ale and whiskey are displayed on Santa's desk. The Coca-Cola Company cannot be credited with manufacturing the Santa Claus, known and loved by children around the world today, but the company certainly helped instill the modernized image into the minds of millions of Americans across the country. The company first tried its hand in Santa-themed advertising in the 1920s, appearing in a smattering of ads published by local newspapers, such as the Saturday Evening Post. At this stage, the drink had been pigeonholed as a drink appropriate only for the summer, but the company was determined to change this. Thus they attached the following slogan to their new campaign: "Thirst knows no season." The marketing team's initial attempt, which spotlighted the original template of their mascot, modeled after Thomas Nast's Scruffy Santa, fell flat. In response, Archie Lee, a Darcy advertising agency executive, outlined the details for the new Coca-Cola Santa, a clean-cut but sportive individual who doubled as a paragon of virtue. In 1931, Haddon Sundblom, a Michigan-born illustrator, was invited to sketch out Coca-Cola's new and improved Santa Claus. Sundblom was instructed to create a realistic Santa as opposed to a department store Santa, as featured in previous ads. Sundblom chose Clement Moore's Santa as the basis for his character, as described in this 1927 article published by the New York Times. A standardized Santa appears to New York children. Height, weight, stature are almost exactly standardized, as are the red garments, the hood, and the white whiskers. The pack full of toys, ruddy cheeks and nose, bushy eyebrows, and a jolly, paunchy effect are also inevitable parts of the requisite makeup. Sundblom also selected a live model using his close friend, a retired salesman named Lou Prentice. When Prentice died, Sundblom installed a mirror in his studio and used his own likeness as a guide for Santa's features. The artist found inspiration every which way he turned. The children seen huddled around Santa in Sundblom's paintings were modeled after the offspring of his neighbors. A mutt, seen in his later work, was fashioned after the grey poodle that belonged to a nearby florist. Sundblom's Santa was finally unmasked in the 1931 winter issue of the Saturday Evening Post, complete with a new tagline, "My hat's off to the paws that refreshes." Coca-Cola's Santa continued to make recurring appearances in this newspaper, as well as the National Geographic, the New Yorker, and the Ladies' Home Journal. Sundblom Santa was more than simply well received by the public. It supposedly boosted the company's winter sales, formerly their slowest season, perhaps even threefold. Like Coca-Cola, ambitious entrepreneurs across the country hastened to milk the most out of the secular Santa character's thriving success in the commercial world. In 1937, Charles Willis Howard, a veteran department store Santa and parade marcher who dominated the Macy's circuit, decided it was high time to refine the art. That year, he established the Charles W. Howard Santa School in New York, which remains the most senior and the most prestigious of its kind today. Obviously, this unique institution, described by CBS as the Harvard of Santa schools, did not earn this title and its stellar reputation overnight. Howard was a professional who took the utmost pride in his work, one determined to assemble the finest Santas the world has ever seen. To start, each student received a Santa kit, including glue-on eyebrows, an elastic band beard, relevant makeup, and so forth. Classes offered by the institution included the history of St. Nicholas and the secular Santa Claus and the geography of the North Pole, as well as lectures that aimed to familiarize students with reindeer, complete with live demonstrations. Later, a separate curriculum was created for aspiring Mother Christmases. Tom Vallant, the current dean of the institution, now in Midland, Michigan, put into words Howard's primary objective. When you portray the image of Santa Claus, it's a privilege, it's an honor, and it's a wonderful thing. It's basically making people happy and enjoying the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of Santa Claus. And when you make folks happy, you know how it is, they let you know how good they feel. It's just a good feeling that grows and grows. In January 1939, the executives at the Chicago office of Montgomery Ward, a nationally renowned retailer, put their heads together going over ideas that had the potential to send their next winter sales through the roof. Before then, the department store sold Christmas-themed coloring books to children over the holidays, which was a perfectly profitable model. It dawned on one of the executives, however, that it would be more cost-effective and rewarding to piece together an original Christmas book of their own. Copywriter Robert May was selected to take on the project. At first, May found it difficult to overcome the hurdles of his creative block. He was struggling financially, still suffering from the wounds inflicted by the Great Depression. The distress brought about by the increasing tensions, indicative of a major war brewing in Europe, did nothing to help his anxiety. Worse yet, his wife was seriously ill with cancer, and the mounting medical bills of the insolvent May only added to his woes. Tasked with creating a story centered on a lovable, semi-anthropomorphic animal, May selected the classic reindeer and named his red-nosed protagonist Rudolph. Like most great writers, May incorporated his own characteristics into Rudolph, describing him as a plucky, misunderstood reindeer, initially shunned for his blinking red nose, but whose deformity ultimately saved Christmas. May was also inspired by the storylines in Moore's poem, as well as the Hans Christian Andersen classic The Ugly Duckling. In December 1939, all 620 branches of Montgomery Ward presented to every visiting child a free copy of the 32-page, fully illustrated pamphlet, which amounted to close to 2.4 million copies. A memo published by the advertising department 2 months prior explained the reasoning behind this marketing tactic. We believe that an exclusive story like this, aggressively advertised in our newspaper ads and circulars, can bring every store an incalculable amount of publicity and, far more important, a tremendous amount of Christmas traffic. Predictably, businesses of all kinds and sizes wasted no time in hitching a ride on the bandwagon. In the decades that followed, Santa Claus merchandise was churned out and put on the market in droves, including in boxes of chocolates, cigarettes, calendars, bars of soap, and just about every other product imaginable. Songs about Father Christmas were also produced by the dozen, such as Santa Baby, I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, Here Comes Santa Claus, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Secular Santa also made several more appearances in advertisements, trumpeting snowstorm machines one day and touting cans of Campbell's soup the next. In another echo of the past, Santa's face was plastered on several propaganda posters distributed across the United States during World War I and World War II. With the men out on the front lines, American women were expected to hold down the home front. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt urged women across the country to rise up to the challenge and take charge of the roles now left vacant. She urged Americans, "A woman's place is in the office, factory, courtroom, marketplace, corner filling station, and other locations too numerous to mention." A 1941 article from the St. Louis Star-Times acknowledged the logic in the First Lady's words. It was customary in wartime for women to take over numerous fields of employment conventionally reserved for men. They insisted, however, that women lacked what was required to play the role of Santa. There is one male domain that should be defended at all costs, the author of the article asserted. A woman Santa Claus? Heaven forbid! That would be stretching the credulity of guileless little children too far. To the dismay of conservative Santa purists, many publicly endorsed the idea of a female Santa Claus, including Charles Howard himself. In 1937, he announced the addition of a female division to the Associated Press. The job of Mrs. Claus, said Howard, was to greet little girls, learn what they want in their Christmas stockings, teach them how to play with dollies, dollhouses, dishes, and clothes. Fortunately, a few entrepreneurs shrugged off the antiquated and sexist norms of the time and built a commercial platform for a female Santa Claus. A caption underneath a photograph published by the Associated Press in November 1942 mentions the first appearance of a female department store Santa. The manpower shortage has even hit Old St. Nick. This lady Santa Claus has turned up, dressed like Mr. Claus, except for the whiskers, at a Chicago department store, and youngsters seem just as happy telling her which gifts they are hoping for. A month later, the Brooklyn Eagle reported, unable to find a man suitable for the job, an F.W. Woolworth store in Union, New Jersey, also hired a female Santa named Mrs. Anna Michelson. She wore a skirt instead of trousers, but all the other habiliments will be the same as those of the traditional Kris Kringle. This new phenomenon was greeted by conflicting reactions. Some applauded these retailers for the progressive marketing tactic, while other, more sensitive traditionalists were revolted by the practice, seemingly to the point that some, such as journalist Henry McLemore, were unable to function. I received the shock of my life when I saw her. If there is such a thing as a minor horror, then a minor horror of this war is female Santa Clauses. Christine Kringle, Sarah St. Nicholas, Susie Santa Claus. Holy smoke! A November 1942 article published by the Wichita Daily Times piled on, complaining, "It may jar the sensibilities of the youngsters to hear a soprano voice instead of a basso profundo one, sounding forth from behind the whiskers." That said, the article ended on a sensible note. Children have been wise enough heretofore to pretend not to know that the department store Santa is a fraud. To accept a Lady Santa will impose no intolerable strain upon their pretended innocence. A December 1942 article released by the Washington Post may have summed things up with the most practical position possible. Rather than disappoint the youngsters altogether, it seems better to have a feminine Santa than no Santa at all. Today, Santa Claus is bigger and more widespread than ever. The innumerable references to Kris Kringle in books, poems, movies, animations, and other forms of media and art aside, Santa Claus is commercially invincible. In 2016, the retail sector within the United States alone saw an addition of more than 700,000 seasonal jobs during the holidays, and that same year, consumers spent close to $700 billion on Christmas shopping. Department store Santas, now more commonly known as mall Santas, continue to be in high demand, earning an average of anywhere between $35 and $50 an hour, or roughly $10,000 to $20,000 each season. A fraction of enterprising Santa Clauses, contracted by small employers and independent agencies, rake in up to $1,000 a day, serving as the entertainment for upscale parties and corporate gatherings of Russian oligarchs, celebrities, and other influential figures. Given the evident timelessness and international popularity of Santa Claus, one can only wonder what's in store for him in the future. That was Santa Claus, The Historical Origins and Evolution of the Legendary Christmas Figure by Charles River Editors, narrated by Colin Fluxman. Copyright 2018 by Charles River Editors. Production copyright 2018 by Charles River Editors.